I work here, and yet I can't on the microphones. So welcome everyone. That's the first thing to say. My name's Ken Skeldon. I'm the Research Engagement Manager in the university. And just on behalf of the university, we're really delighted to be hosting the Glasgow Doors Open Festival Hub for the first time this year. It's really exciting, and it's fantastic to have you all here. In fact, it's probably one of the first evening public talks we've really had. So it is, even more exciting because of that. So a very warm welcome to all of you. This building is all about research, and one of the additional reasons that it's great to have to be hosting this year is that it also overlaps with a festival that we're running, and you'll have seen on the seats a flyer for Arcadia. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. It's our opening festival for this building. Lots of research-led events throughout the rest of September, so please have a look at the programme and hope to see some of you back for some of that. And also, just before we really start with the talk this evening and the rest of the event, I'd like to just take a moment to recognise the sad passing of Her Majesty the Queen last week, and on behalf of the university, and I'm sure I speak for everyone, her lifetime of service and dedication to the nation will be long remembered, and she'll be missed by so many. So I just wanted to make that statement. That's really all from me. So now I'm going to hand over to Stephen, who'll say a little bit more about the Festival Hub and also introduce tonight's event. So thank you for coming.
Hi everyone, how are you? My name is Stephen Sheriff. I'm the Events and Development Coordinator at Glasgow Building Preservation Trust. GBPT is a charitable property developer, and we work to rescue, repair and rehabilitate buildings across the city. And our most recent project is the West Boathouse on Glasgow Green, and that should be finishing up soon. GBPT has ran Doors Open Days in the city since 1990, and we work with the Scottish Civic Trust, the national coordinator, and Doors Open Days is in fact celebrated in every region in Scotland now. We're very grateful to the university for hosting us here today, especially to Cassie Dillon, Zara Gladman and Kenneth Skeldon, who have been working alongside us to realise the event this year. Another huge thank you has got to go to the technical team. That's Colin Sloper, Andrew Lynch and Daniel Wilton, and to Ed Buckley, who's here in the room, making sure that all this amazing technology does what it's told, which is more challenging than you might imagine. Because of the digital festival in 2020, it became I'll just shout for the moment. Oh, we're back. So many people were so keen to be watching the lectures online, and we now have this incredible resource on our YouTube channel, and people can tune in from anywhere in the world. We had people tuning in from Australia at like 3 in the morning to watch these lectures. And so now, like, we're hopefully through the pandemic, people still want to see this online, but there's not so many speakers are as keen as doing the webinars. So it's really fantastic that we are broadcasting the events live tonight. And so if any of your friends weren't able to make it along tonight, you can tell them that the lecture can be watched on our YouTube channel, and there'll also be videos on our Facebook and I think on our Twitter feed as well. Like many cultural organisations across the city, Doors Open Days really is still struggling to recover from the pandemic, and so if anyone does want to make a donation to the festival, you can do so, but we have a text donate facility which is noted on these little signs as you leave tonight, and the Doors Open volunteers will also be on hand with a tap donate if anyone fancies chipping in. I'd like to thank also our sponsors, it's Glasgow City Council, Arlington Baths, Page Park, Gardner and Theobald, and all of the other sponsors that you see here up on the board. The festival really would not be possible without them. Just a couple of health and safety things to go through with you before we get going. There are no fire drills planned this evening, but so if the fire alarm does go off, please make your way through the doors behind you and then to the doors across the exhibition forum and straight out into the courtyard where the assembly point is. There are toilets at each end of the atrium, and the nearest ones to you are on the right next to the arch. So on to the main event. I'd like to welcome Dr Karen Mailley-Watt for her lecture, Claiming the City, Women, Space and Glasgow. Dr Karen Mailley-Watt has an MA Joint Honours and an M.Lit in Decorative Arts and Design History from the University of Glasgow. She was a graduate from the School of Arts and Humanities Arts-funded PhD researcher at the University of Glasgow and the Glasgow School of Art, completing her studies in 2021. Karen has been published in various journals and online platforms, including the Scottish Society for Art History, the Decorative Arts Society Journal, Decorating Dissidents and Historic Environment Scotland. She has many research interests, including gender and the built environment, forms of protest and artist production impact, all in relation to Glasgow, obviously the best city in Scotland. So thank you. Join with me now in welcoming Karen Mailley-Watt.
Hi, Stephen. You want me to use this one or this one?
Oh, yeah, you've got that one.
Have you got the clicker?
Yeah.
Thanks. Cheers. So before I start, I just want to say thank you to Stephen and Glasgow Building Preservation Trust for inviting me back. It's been a long delay for the last 2 years of not having in-person talks, so it's quite nice to be back here. So today, I'm going to talk about claiming the city and two spaces, the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists, which I covered my PhD in, and the Ladies Department at the Glasgow Athenaeum. So upon rewriting this talk for today, I realised that I'd been sitting actually on a better title than Claiming the City. So Dr Adele Patrick, whom I will speak more about later, wrote a chapter called Claiming Space and Being Brave, Activism, Agency and Art in the Making of a Women's Museum. And upon reading it, I realised that much of what Adele talks about and the key factors that she discusses could be related to these two spaces, which are currently up. All of the women I'll touch upon claimed space and were extremely brave, something which us historians sometimes sideline. It takes guts, gusto and nerve to stand your ground within a male-dominated urban landscape. So just for clarity, I am a feminist. So yeah, two pictures up that I absolutely adore. So this is the Glasgow Women's Library in Bridgeton. I'm guessing most people have either visited or know about it. So the first one is the building, and then the second one is the interior, and you can see the fun on all their faces. So walking through the doors of the Glasgow Women's Library, GWL, which is in Bridgeton, just on the outskirts of Glasgow city centre, I enter a magical space. Each shelf, row by row, is lovely, filled with books and publication, which were written for and about women. This internationally renowned space, which holds its own archive and museum collection, was conceived in 1987 and was a grassroots feminist artist collective which was called Women in Profile. This project was a reaction to, again, the male-dominated programme of Glasgow status of European City of Culture. So again, we've got two well-known faces here, which a lot of people love. I think these are my idols. So I've got a Dr Adele Patrick, and we've got Sue John from Glasgow Women's Library. And the second picture up here is from 1991 up at Garnet Hill, which was the first situation or sort of place for the Women's Library. So Women in Profile, which would later develop into GWL in 1991, was established by a body of women from various backgrounds, including academia, community artists, activists, and broad-ranging art practitioners. GWL was founded and continues to operate on feminist principles as an intersectional and welcoming place which caters lovingly for all women. Today in 2022, it is recognised and appreciated worldwide as an important, accessible space where women from a range of backgrounds and professions gather to conduct research, share knowledge, and socialise. So again, if anybody's been in here, you know you'll get a cup of tea as soon as you walk through the door. Entering the main space before reaching the welcome desk, you are met with an iron ornamental umbrella stand. Still in use, the umbrella stand carefully cradles an array of wet brollies brought by visitors. However, the symbolic nature and forthright placement in the library and its colouring, the white, purplish and green status of it is hard to misconstrue. The stand is said to have been painted by a group of suffragettes who had been held in a nearby prison at the turn of the 19th century. By displaying this important historical object in the main entry space, GWL intrinsically links past feminists with present feminists. Around the room, Small groups of women sit chatting among the racks filled with books, covering everything from feminist theory, fiction, political thought, and everything in between. This is a place where networks are formed, voices are taught to be raised, and activists are born. But I've often wondered what came before GWL. What spaces did Glasgow women in the Victorian and early Edwardian period use their agency to create and to assert claim over? So this talk, as I said at the start, will focus on two spaces which occupied and were created by a similar body of women. So Glasgow Society of Lady Artists and the Ladies Department of the Glasgow Athenaeum. And it will show that these women used their determination, connections and agency to actively claim space, both private and public, in the city. So the first one we're going to talk about, I'm just going to get a drink, is the Ladies Department in the Glasgow Athenaeum. So this building has three different kind of stages to it. We've got George Place, and then we've got two extensions, which are added on in 1886 and 1888. So originally established as a commercial college, and it's now the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. The Glasgow Athenaeum Club was founded in 1846 by a cohort of men, and it was led by a young chemistry student called Moses Provan. And he was spurred on by a leaflet that he received from the Glasgow Educational Society. Yet, as this institution developed, it became quickly supported by a group of women whose stories have been largely marginalised, but are intrinsically woven throughout the establishment's history. So currently, this was the first extension here. Then we've got the theatre, which I'll talk about later, and this is quite important. It's now the Hard Rock Cafe. So a bit of a change. So these are some of the activities that you could do at the Glasgow Athenaeum from about the 1880s. So they had several schools. They had the School of Art, School of Music. You also had a gymnastic club, and you also had the drama club. So these are just a wee couple of pictures that I've pulled out the archive. If you haven't been to the archive, please go because it's great. The archivist is called Stuart, and he's fantastic. So from its establishment, many women, including Mrs. Malcolm Muir, Elizabeth Ingleton, Miss Eliza Cook, and Miss Grace Patterson, have played various roles in helping to shape the institution, but not many people seem to know about them. So in 1848, a women's committee was formed to support fundraising endeavours to support the all-male board's vision. In his publication, James Lauder notes, which he wrote for the Jubilee, he says that Mrs. Malcolm Muir was the ladies' committee convener, and Miss Ingleton occupied the position of secretary. But as an appreciation for the hard work, both women on the committee were bestowed lifetime memberships. Although governed by an all-male board upon the establishment of the Glasgow Athenaeum and restricted to certain positions within the fundraising committee, such as ladies' convener, arguably these were the first stepping stones in helping women to have a stronger voice, presence and control over the space. Such acts in 1848 would have helped to open other doors for other women such as Grace Patterson in the future. However, I don't think Grace, which we'll touch upon later, needed much drive or gusto. So this is Miss Malcolm Muir. Again, every time I try and talk about a woman, I try and find a picture of her, because again, it's not a very common thing, especially with the Glasgow Athenaeum, it's usually men that are represented. And she's also known as Mrs. Watson because she got married again. She sat on the Glasgow Athenaeum Ladies Committee. She organised the fundraisers for the library, and I need to find more information about her. Currently I'm struggling. So if anybody knows about her, please let me know. Although none of the records from the Ladies Committee have survived, James Lauder notes that Mrs. Muir and Miss Ingleton successfully organised a bazaar to support the new library. Bazaars were a popular way for the upper classes to raise funds for clubs and societies in Glasgow, and this was hailed as a huge success. The Chronicle notes that women not only organised the events, but also made and supplied articles for sale, including paintings on velvet and embroidery. It further states that the event was, and I quote, most attractive to be witnessed in the city for years, and this was high praise indeed, because these bazaars and fundraisers were happening quite a lot. So the next woman I'm going to talk about is Eliza Cook. So women were also instrumental in building the collection by gifting publications to the library. Out of 1,190 volumes in total, the library were given by various donors. Several women donated, including Miss Eliza Wallace, Miss Catherine Borland, Miss Grimmond, and Miss Eliza Cook. And she donated 2 publications of her own poems. Cook was a celebrated poet associated with the Chartist movement and women's rights, and she published in various publications and wrote several volumes throughout her lifetime. The Glasgow Athenaeum did have several women who were associated with and were active in various forms of political activism. So for example, Grace, I'm going to talk about her later, but Grace Patterson was the founder of the Glasgow and the West of Scotland Association for Women's Suffrage, also known as the NUWSS, I always get that wrong. And she was the chair of the Ladies' Committee in the 1890s at the Glasgow Athenaeum. Other women who frequented the space and were associated with NUWSS included Dorothy Carlton-Smith, or Smythe, however way you want to pronounce it, and De Courcy Lithwaite-Dewar. Again, I will be discussing them later. So these are the new extensions to the building. So 1886 to 1888. Again, I'm going to touch upon the theatre slightly later on. So the Glasgow Athenaeum developed into a central institutional hub for the middle classes, and it catered for both sexes. And by 1888, it held custom premises held in St George Place in central Glasgow. Before the new building in St George Place, this is the extension we're talking about, women only had access to the library for reading purposes. The new Athenaeum building, with the theatre, currently on screen, was designed by John Burnett in the classical style, and this opened on the 25th of January 1888. Importantly, the new building now housed a ladies' department, which was completely separate from the other spaces of the building. So there's a quote, actually I'll just touch upon this just now. So this is the theatre here, and it held 760 people. It also allowed the Dramatic Society a space. It had a new restaurant, and it had public and private billiard rooms, and it also had space for the music school and the new gymnasium. So in the 41st annual report in 1888, the ladies' department and their rooms were noted as, and I quote, entirely distinct from those occupied by the gentlemen, and forming, as they really do, a ladies' club in the most central situations. They are found to be convenient in place to resort for ladies visiting the city. So currently on screen, I've got so many architectural plans. These are just two that I've pulled out. So this is the ground floor for part of the extension which led onto George Place. So we've got the ladies' writing room, we've got the upper lending library, and we've got the gentlemen's writing room. So again, I'm trying to do analysis about how much space each sex was using at that point. We've also got the lending library here. So we've got the ladies' reading room, we've got the gentlemen's reading room. As I say, these plans are huge, and I'm just so grateful for Stuart for scanning these in for me during COVID, because there was no access to the archives. So this is something else I'm looking into. So although occupying one of the most central situations in the heart of the city, it's evident that the ladies' rooms were not as popular as expected, as a committee of women were set up to, and I quote, act along with the directors and management. So now we come to Grace. And Grace is quite fascinating. So she was appointed to the Glasgow School Board, the Women's Trade Unionist, and she was a member of the Protective and Provident League. She was also active in the temperance movement and was appointed the department chair to the ladies' department in 1889. So from the minute books, it seemed that the appointment was made due to many members feeling that the department should be better known, and she undertook a campaign to try and raise a profile for the ladies' department. So I'm still trying to find out exactly what she was doing, but from the minutes, she is quite feisty. And she does have fallen, so she is quite a leader, as you can see from all the different places that she's been. And she was obviously one of the founders of the NUWSS. So interestingly, Patterson is also noted as, and I love this, a directoress to the department. However, I don't think this was an official title. I think this is something she came up with herself, because it's only appearing in the press. It's not appearing in any of the minutes. So with decisive action and being proactive, the committee headed by Patterson is noted that it was successful and there was an increase in subscribers. This process of having a ladies' committee working alongside an all-male board of directors is still evident in 1898 to 99. And it's noted in the annual report that for a couple of years after that, it's still active. The lack of popularity may have been due to the building being a shared sex building, as it did house gentlemen's separate spaces. And it also housed, so this whole building from George Place up to Buchanan Street now housed a central library, writing rooms, restaurant, newspaper room, newsroom, and several recreational rooms, one of which was occupied by the Glasgow Chess Club. And obviously it also had the college, which had 8 classrooms. So although the building had a separate designated space for the ladies' department, it must be remembered that the building was still overly a shared sex space, with men and women entering via the same entrance and sharing the same spaces. GSLA, which is the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists, however, ran on strict feminist principles by only allowing men to enter the clubhouse under very specific circumstances, or if in the presence, if they deemed that their presence, the male presence, was going to be beneficial to their members. GSLA had no issue making men enter the club. GSLA had no issue making men enter in the club space using a side door, which arguably could be read as the club's view of men's subordinate status to clubhouse members. So men were not allowed to enter through the front door. The active feminist control of the space was key to GSLA's popularity and expanding membership body in the 1890s. So this is Glasgow Society of Artists, which is in 5 Blythswood Square. Currently, it's not in the best condition. It's owned by a developer, and they've left the windows open. So all this part, which I took in 2019, is now overgrown, and we've actually got greenery growing into the space. We have been trying to find out more about it, but... So the first one here is a sketch from one of the newspapers, and this is the main pillar here, if you can see here, and this is set up for a lecture. But if you look further back, you can see the gallery. And then up at the top, we've got the gallery space here, which is currently in use. And this is from the early turn of the century. And then we've got a recreational space here. So in comparison to the Glasgow Athenaeum, the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists was the only female occupied and operated building in Glasgow at the end of the 19th century that I currently know of. So GSLA boasted an array of women who were forerunners in their fields. So just to touch on the artist and associate members, so there's different memberships you could get in the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists. You could be an artist, an associate, an honorary member, or a layperson. So your artist membership was anybody in Glasgow. Associate was anybody out with Glasgow with 30 miles. Your lay membership was anybody who wasn't taking part or an artist, trained in any way. You could either be self-taught or you could be professionally trained. And honorary was people who were visiting the city. They could still use the spaces. So some of the artists and associate members include Dorothy Carton-Smith, or Smythe. Then we've got De Courcy Lithwaite Dewar. We have This Wee Firecracker, Jessie M. King. Then we've got Anne Macbeth. We have Nora Nielsen-Gray. We've got Jessie Newbury. We have Grace Melvin. I don't know if many people know. You might recognise some of the other faces. But Grace Melvin doesn't class herself as a feminist in any way whatsoever or is interested in women's rights. But they all attended Glasgow School of Art. So all these women attended Glasgow School of Art roughly about the same time or overlapping. Grace taught there, but then she moved over to Vancouver in Canada to help establish the Vancouver School of Art. And then we've got Margaret Brodie, who's an architect. So we also had lay members, including Dr. Winifred Ross, and we also had Jane McElroy, Dr. Jane McElroy and Louise McElroy, who I'll touch upon later. So originally started in 1882 as an artist club, GSLA developed into a safe haven for women via a privately owned clubhouse with the financial means to partake in recreational and social solitude away from men in the heart of the city. The club was started by a group of female artists who were attending GSA in an attempt to counteract the lack of opportunities, training and exhibition platforms in Glasgow. Inspired by the London Society of Female Artists, which was established in 1855, the early members of GSLA began to meet in Georgina Greenlee's studio. So her studio was a shared space, which she shared with her brothers and her dad was Robert Greenlee's, and he, at that point, was the headmaster of Glasgow School of Art. The studio, which is situated in 136 Wellington Street, served as a meeting place for several GSA students, including Jane Nisbet, Helen Salmon, Margaret MacDonald, but not the Margaret MacDonald that was married to Charles Rennie Mackintosh, Jane Cowan-Whymper, and Henrietta Smith-Robertson. So by 1893, GSLA had developed into a club with a dual function. So it catered for non-artists and had a large lay membership body. It's evident that there was a need for a non-artist membership and a new creation for a women-only space, as there was no other residential space for women in the city. So for example, the Glasgow Evening Post stated that, and this is a quote that's up just now, "For some time, the ladies have been in view of forming such a club, but they were wise enough to wait with a large and influential art and lay membership. They were able to secure the handsome house in Blythswood Square, which was opened on Saturday." So you can see that they were forward planning and created this lay membership because they knew they needed financial support. And they were extremely popular and they did have a huge waiting list. So not only does the article record in 1893 that they had a large and influential body, but it also states further down the article that it was quite innovative for Scottish social life. So this is something that was actually new, it was niche, it was happening. The GSLA membership body consisted of pioneers in their field, including art, science, medicine and education. And the membership list does read like a roll of honour for Scotland's influential women. In the later 1890s, the clubhouse had facilities which included a dining room, bedroom, picture gallery. They also had modest domestic help. And importantly, unlike the ladies' department at the Glasgow Athenaeum, control of all the spaces related to the club were controlled by members, so by an all-women council. This was the crucial difference to the ladies' department at the Glasgow Athenaeum, which was obviously run by a ladies' committee, but still had to answer to an all-male board at the turn of the century. So there's just a couple of other pictures here for the gallery space, which is still there. It's just you can't get access to it. I just want to point out quickly the Medusa head. So this is quite interesting. Again, it could be read along feminist lines. So by 1895, the introduction of the purpose-built gallery space further emphasised this. The building made a clear statement of supporting members' art from inception to physical exhibition. So the clubhouse was used to exhibit art, to train. They had a sketch club, and they also had life drawing classes. The life drawing classes I'm trying to find out more about. Trying to find out more about the models and what, was it draped or was it nude? I'm guessing it was draped, but it's something that I have to look into. So the clubhouse permitted the various members their own designated space to hold club meetings, socialise, network, conduct business, and rooms to exhibit and train. And there was even accommodation for members to visit if required. So bedrooms, they had bedrooms in the space in the 1890s up until 1910s. So such accommodation was a rare luxury, with artist groups throughout the UK only holding meetings in members' private homes or within gallery spaces that they exhibited. The exception to this is the Glasgow Art Club, which was round the corner from this building, and it was all male. Women couldn't become members until the 1980s. And at the turn of the century, they couldn't even sign themselves in as visitors. So, a home away from home, the townhouse catered for the domestic needs of all members, including providing dining facilities, newspapers, servants, and refreshments. The popularity and loyalty towards the club can be seen by the generosity of members in the early days. De Courcy-Lithwaite-Dewar, who wrote the history for the club, states that upon moving into the clubhouse, that members gave or begged for furniture, carpets, crockery to finish the space. So they're creating this space to make it their own. So it also shows a strong sense of community spirit, which focused on a sense of purpose and support with one feminist goal at the forefront. So due to the increase in membership in the 1890s, by 1895, GSLA needed to expand their facilities, so the club set out about arranging a 4-day fancy fair. This event aimed to raise funds to financially secure and expand the previously rented clubhouse. Such fundraising events would attract the upper echelons of society, which were not just unique to GSLA. The club had a fancy fair from the 11th to the 14th of December in 1895. This fundraising fancy fair was styled as a mock Tudor village, which you can see up here, and they're also in costume. And it was held at the Fine Arts Institute, which is now known as the Royal Glasgow Institute of Fine Arts. And this was in 150 to 152 Wellington Street, and the event was open daily from noon to 9:30. So from contemporary commentators, it is evident that the mode of the fancy fair also consisted of stalls and entertainments, and this was a popular way to try and raise some funds, and occurred throughout the UK and Ireland. So you get different versions of this fancy fair, but like you get an Old English fancy fair or a medieval fancy fair, and they've just landed on Tudor. So the lay members had a range of stalls which were manned by influential and well-connected socialites, including Lady Augusta Blythewood, Lady Octavia Shaw Stewart, Lady Georgina Belhaven and Stetton, Lady Kelvin, Lady Powell and Lady King. So over the 4 days of the fair, they aimed to raise £5,000 for the building extensions through the various activities, but they seem to have raised from the press of an amount of 3,000 upwards. So I'm still trying to find the exact amount that they were trying to raise from the fancy fair. Although supported heavily by the actions of the lay body, artistic endeavour was always at the forefront. For instance, all the stalls, except for the refreshment stall, fish pond and entertainment stage, were named after famous artists. The money raised via the Fancy Fair was a tangible manifestation of the hard work, determination and forward planning of the women to raise these funds to not only purchase but also to improve the townhouse. So by having sole control of the clubhouse due to the fundraising activity, by the 1890s they began to create this space which not only benefited women living in and around Glasgow, but also provided a safe space and hospitality for women from other locations, which was nationally and internationally. So by the 1920s, Glasgow Society of Lady Artists were seeking affiliation with other clubs in the UK, which included the Pioneer Club, the Kelvin Club, the Scottish Women's Club and the Forum Club. And by the 1930s, you can actually see them going wider afield. So club members are going out and seeking international connections, and there's correspondence and notes in the archives from clubs in New Zealand, Australia, America, Canada and South Africa. So this is just another wee sketch that I found from the Fancy Fair. So you can see that they're all in costume. So there was different entertainments throughout from the 11th to the 14th over the 4 days. And there are famous faces who are also involved. So Charles Rennie Mackintosh was also involved, De Courcy Lithwick, and we've also got Dorothy Carlton-Smith, Jessie M. King. So again, it's all these influential women now that we recognise as the Glasgow Girls. So moving on, pro-women agenda from a private sphere to a public sphere. Although not widely discussed in scholarship, these two spaces, so Glasgow Society of Lady Artists and the Ladies Club, the Ladies Department, were crucial in helping to support women to openly project feminist ideas and voices through events, talks and fundraisers. The networks which these women were involved in, be it through friends, colleagues, social acquaintances or other club members, helped to move an idea which may have been discussed through closed doors onto a new open and public forum. So for example, currently on the screen we've got Emily Faithfull, looks like Garrett Fawcett, Lady Balfour, and my Finnish is terrible, Thinka Hulton. And these are all women who were involved in some form of trying to make the world a better place for women. So, for example, we've got Emily Faithfull and Melissa Garrett Fawcett, who delivered women-focused lectures in the large hall of the Athenaeum throughout the 1870s. Faithfull lectured in the space in the 1870s on the movement relating to women and the vexed question and how to solve it. And also Fawcett addressed the audience on some female characters of George Eliot on the 21st of February 1873. So commenting on Fawcett's lecture, the Glasgow Herald noted that, and I quote, Miss Fawcett read extracts from Dickens, Thackeray, satirising novels in millinery, emotion, heart-burning and upholstery seemed to be necessarily associated with. Proceeding to the immediate subject of the lecture, she asked what ideas Dickens' women conveyed of women's duties and their power of fulfilling them. His heroines were for the most part inane and helpless phantoms who were constantly swooning into the arms of anyone and everyone who would catch them, and a chief part of their lives must have been spent by drying their eyes and recovering from fainting fits. So her lecture clearly indicates her disdain for how male authors are portraying women in their writing. She further counteracts the common male fictional idea of women being one-dimensional and jealous of one another. And she states that George Eliot created realistic female characters by portraying their flaws. So again, she's this idea of like creating a three-dimensional or a more complex character instead of this one-dimensional female character that are created by male authors. So Fawcett also highlighted Eliot's feminist stance that, and I quote, women relied on each other for help when in trouble. So she's using this lived experience, whereas the male authors are not. So furthermore, the hall of the Athenaeum was utilised by various suffrage organisations to present talks. In 1908, politician, activist and journalist Thinka Hulton spoke, and in 1909, Mrs. Pankhurst graced the stage. So I've stole the title Suffragette City from, famous song. But just to show you, 5 Blythswood Square is also an incredibly important space for discussion. So the purple up at the top, the connecting lines, all people who are associated with Glasgow School of Art. This is also another crucial space when we're talking about women's rights. So we've got Daisy Mcclashan. I don't know if many people know about her, but if you want to ever see a prime example of what we think is a suffragette dress, is held up in the Glasgow School of Art, and she's got a hidden pocket in the seam of her dress. So that could have been used for various activities. We've got Anne Macbeth, who was instrumental in helping to elevate needlework as an art form. We've got Jessie Newbury, who was her mentor, also helped in the department for needlework and women's crafts, again highlighting that. We've got Fran Newbury, who was the director of Glasgow School of Art, but he is also noted as being an ally for the cause. And then we've got Jessie M. King down at the bottom. So all these women are connected in some way for pro-women events, pro-women rights, or forms of protest. So then 5 Blytheswood Square with all the orange, which is connected. We've got all these different people here. So we've got Jenny Allen. Again, she was militant. She was a militant suffragette. And then we've got Flora Drummond. So from the minute books, it is evident that this wee triangle here, they're pairing up quite a lot when they're getting arrested together in different events. But Jenny Allen and Catherine Chapman have nominated Mrs. Drummond to become a member, but she's rejected, and I can't find out more about it. I think I've got a funny feeling that it is Flora. So again, we've got all these people who are sharing this one space. So in a similar fashion, GSLA did not want to officially align itself to a specific pro-women cause, as it did but it did have internal events which were held in the safety of 5 Blytheswood Square. So they didn't directly support a pro-women agenda as when outwardly political or militant, but they did host a talk by, I'll just go back, Frances Balfour. So she's coming up to 5 Blytheswood Square to give a lecture. And from the books, it's recorded that she talked on the topic of the Scottish science writer and polymath, Mary Somerville, but as expected, doesn't give more details than that. Furthermore, the clubhouse was used as a space, to act as a base for people who visited Glasgow, so for women who are coming into the city. So in 1911, GSLA held a reception in the clubhouse for the National Union of Women Workers, who held their conference in Glasgow that year. The reception catered for up to 100 delegates who were bestowed honorary membership in the club during their visit. So such events would have allowed GSLA members to network and nurture new social and professional infrastructures, which would have been beneficial to both parties. So I'll just go back. So although having a large body of women with a diverse and often complex political leanings and associations with other organisations, it is evident that GSLA's minute books, that the club as an entity didn't want to publicly align to one cause or another. So for example, in 1907, GSLA's council rejected a request by artist member Eve Baker, a well-known suffragette, and she wanted to enclose a memorial in favour for women's rights and enfranchisement. Furthermore, it is noted that GSLA's published history that from time to time controversy had arisen from the name, regarding the name of the society. So they wanted to change it from the word lady to women. Baker again is present in this discussion, and she raised the matter with the council in 1908. And although there was an overwhelming majority in favour of changing the name to women artists, this didn't happen, and it was blocked by the older members. So it was hindered by social expectations and bound by organisational hierarchy. Baker and the majority who voted in favour were overruled. Thus, the renaming of the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists didn't happen until 1975. It's also important to note that there's an intersection of women using the same spaces. So, for example, Mrs. Angus Higginbotham sat on both the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists Council in 1906 and also the Glasgow Athenaeum Ladies Committee from 1898 to 1901. And there are several other women who are connected with both spaces. So for example, Dorothy Carlton-Smith, or Smythe, who would have been Glasgow School of Art's first female director, was extremely active with the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists, and she also helped to organise different theatre events at the Athenaeum in the early 20th century. So an entry from the Scottish section of the suffrage publication Common Cause in 1912 states that 3 members of the Glasgow Society of Lady Artists were working with Miss Watson, the national union organiser for the Glasgow and West of Scotland Association, in fundraising activities. So currently on screen, we've got a quote, which is from Common Cause, and it says, In order to raise funds for the society, Miss Dorothy Carlton-Smith, or Smythe, Miss Paxton Brown and Miss Dewar are forming a committee to organise a pageant, tableau, plays, etc. to take place in a public hall in November or December. Miss Paxton Brown and Miss De Courcy Dewar are well-known artists, and Miss Dorothy Carlton-Smith is a designer for opera and theatre. So the advertisement in November of the same year outlines the event, which would have been held at the Athenaeum Hall from the 6th and the 7th of December 1912. The programme includes a tableau of famous women, which was arranged by De Courcy Dewar, and it features figures of Joan of Arc, Queen Isabella of Spain, and Elizabeth Fry. And the tableau, Devolution of Man, was arranged by Dorothy Carlton-Smith. So currently on screen, we've got De Courcy Dewar dressed as a judge. This has been dated from about 1902 to 1903, but I think it's slightly later. I think it's 1912, and I'll tell you why. So through the various scenes, the tableau depicted a timeline from Eve in the Garden of Eden to women's gradual freedom from the state of slavery, before ending with man being showcased as a specimen, recently discovered, may I add, in the University of Glasgow Zoological Department. And other scenes included the new women who she was demanding the vote, and an all-female courtroom passing judgment on various men. So I think this is what this is from. Essentially, the bold feminist tableau turned the tables on socially accepted gender roles by portraying men as the weaker sex with limited agency and power, or in some aspects being surplus to requirements. So they're now in the zoological department. Through such archival material, there's evidence that Smith, Paxton Brown, and De Courcy Dewar were all active in GSLA and within various suffrage circles, playing an active and effective role. It's also important to note, and this is something that historians seem to forget, the friendship side of things. These women were friends for most of their lives, and you can find them, they're interconnected through even right into old age. So, as I say, we've got De Courcy Dewar dressed as a judge. Now we've got the advert, which was the dramatic entertainment of the Athenaeum Theatre. So this is the interior of the Athenaeum Theatre, which is now the Hard Rock Cafe. If you want to view them, you can go to Canmore and you can see a lot more pictures of what it would have looked like. So yeah, it was 760, we're told. So just to quickly touch on a couple of the women that I spoke about. De Courcy Dewar, she was present at the St Andrews meeting, which was the big one that Pankhurst was at. She was arrested as well in 1906, along with other GSLA staff members and Glasgow Society of Lady Artists members. She arranged the festivities at the Anthem Hall in 1912. She was extremely active, and this is quite interesting. So Claire, I don't think she's here today, but she's the archivist at the Mitchell. She's pointed out that she was active in both militant and non-militant organisations. And she sat on the executive committee for non-militant NUWSS in 1908. But she does state that she is going to go and cause some havoc in the minutes. Oh, there we go. So I just need to touch on Doris because I just think she's fabulous and she doesn't get the same sort of screen time as other Glasgow girls. She would have been the first female director of Glasgow School of Art, but she sadly died before she could take up the post. She was appointed, but she died before she could actually physically take the post on. She worked all over, so she Ireland and internationally. She was extremely active in GSA and she worked in several productions. And I think she's also friends with Ellen Terry. This is something else I'm looking into. So just to finish off, at the turn of the 19th century, similar to the founders of Glasgow Women's Library, these women had gusto, drive and agency to enthusiastically play pivotal roles in helping to establish important safe spaces, new public platforms and associated facilities for women in the city. Although women were they weren't controlling the space in the Athenaeum due to not owning the building nor having their own council in the same manner as Glasgow Society of Lady Artists, arguably they were the forerunners for women in education, and they possibly appointed Scotland's first female professor, Emma Ritter-Bondy. So this is just an example out of the archives. So this is sketches of the professor in the musical school, and as you can see, they're all white, moustached men. And then we've got Emma Ritter-Bondy here. So again, Stuart from the Royal Conservatoire Archives has done a lot of research into her. So if you want to find out more about her, please check out their website. So in comparison, GSLA, Clubhouse, which was conceived, operated and owned by members, continued to support women until the 1960s, when the old-fashioned hierarchical structure of the club was less appealing to the new generation and body of feminists. With both spaces, which were carved out in the 1880s, with some of the most fundamental steps in helping to elevate and instill confidence in women and create a legacy for feminist spaces. So just to finish off, if you want to read Adele Patrick's Claiming Space and Being Brave, that's the details there. I would highly recommend it because it is something we seem to forget about, how much bravery is taken to actually claim some space. And I just thought this was funny. So women do it entertainingly. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for kicking off the festival. I'd like to open the floor for questions, if anyone would like to ask anything. Yeah, I'll give you the microphone.
Thank you very much, that was really interesting. I just wanted to ask if the GSLA was diverse in terms of class at all, or if it was mainly just a middle class space.
So far what I can find is middle class and upper class women. It is something that I touch upon in my PhD. It is something I'm looking further into as well. But it does seem that it is adhering to social standards at that point. Thank you. I know that's quite depressing.
Did anyone else have any other questions? No? Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming to, yes, this is the first lecture. If anyone is staying on for Norrie Wilson, you're welcome to stay in the room or go out and get a breather. We have lectures on all week, apart from Friday, and also on Saturday and Sunday. So please do have a look on the website to see what else is on. Quite a lot of stuff is sold out, but there's lots of things if you're wanting to visit buildings at the weekend. There's lots of buildings that are open with no booking necessary, so please do go ahead. And thank you all for joining us. I'd like to say one more thank you to our amazing volunteers who have been helping us out today. And thank you to Karen.
Thanks, Stephen.